History 5000 BC to 2500 BC. Part 1. Early farming, metallurgy, and village life. Circa 5500 BC to 4000 BC. Chapter 1. Foundations of agriculture and early village life. Welcome. I'm Professor Snooze, and over the next few hours, we'll be drifting through the deep history of humanity, floating back to that distant era when our ancestors first learned to shape the earth to their needs. Take a deep breath, settle in, and let us begin our gentle journey around 5500 BC, a time when the great transformation from wandering to settling was already underway in scattered corners of the world. Picture, if you will, the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, in what is now central Iraq. Here, along the peaceful banks of the Tigris River, a people we call the Samara culture were building something remarkable. Between roughly 5500 and 4800 BC, these early farmers constructed some of the earliest known irrigation canals. Imagine the ingenuity required, observing the gentle flow of water, understanding the quiet needs of wheat and barley, and then carefully digging channels through the earth to bring life-giving moisture to semi-arid zones where rain alone would not suffice. The Samara people left behind painted pottery, decorated with geometric patterns and natural motifs that speak to us softly across millennia. They built mud brick temples, structures that required not just individual effort, but organized labor, cooperation planning. These temples were ritual centers, places where the community gathered, where the sacred and the practical intertwined. In those painted ceramics and carefully constructed buildings, we see the fingerprints of emerging social complexity, of people learning to work together toward common goals. By around 5000 BC, irrigation and organized agriculture were being practiced throughout Mesopotamia. This wasn't merely watering a few garden plots. This was systematic, intensive cultivation in environments that would otherwise remain arid and unproductive. Networks of canals branched across the landscape, supporting higher population densities than hunting and gathering could ever sustain. These waterworks were, in a very real sense, laying the groundwork for what would come later, for the great cities that would rise in subsequent millennia. For now, we simply note that the infrastructure of civilization was being laid, one canal at a time, by farmers who had learned to command water itself. Let us drift eastward now, to the foothills of Balochistan in what is present-day Pakistan. Here, at a site called Mehrgarh, between roughly 7000 and 5000 BC, people constructed large mud brick granaries. These weren't simple storage pits dug into the ground. These were substantial buildings, carefully designed to store wheat and barley, to keep grain safe and dry through the seasons. The presence of these granaries tells us several things. It tells us that these villages were producing surpluses, growing more than they needed for immediate consumption. It tells us that they were planning for the future, for lean times, for the winter months. At Mehrgarh, archaeologists found evidence of domesticated goats and sheep as well. These people were not relying on agriculture alone, but combining crop farming with animal husbandry in what we might call a mixed economy. The village was occupied year-round, a permanent settlement where children grew up, where generations succeeded one another in the same location. This permanence is something we take for granted now, but it was revolutionary then. For most of human history, people had moved with the seasons, following game, seeking wild plants as they ripened. But here, at Mehrgarh, people stayed put, and the earth provided for them reliably, year after year. Moving north and west, to Central Asia, we find the village of jade in what is now Turkmenistan. This settlement, occupied between approximately 6200 and 5000 BC, lay east of the Caspian Sea in a region that was then, as now, a crossroads between different worlds. The people of jade built their homes from mud brick, those humble but effective building blocks that could be made from the earth itself. They grew millet, a hardy grain well suited to the region's climate, and they herded goats across the surrounding pasturelands. Inside their homes, archaeologists discovered hearths, those essential centers of domestic life where food was cooked, where warmth was provided on cold nights, where families gathered. They also found granaries, more evidence of food surpluses and forward planning. The presence of these features indicates that Jaitan was occupied year-round. These were not temporary camps, not seasonal shelters. This was a place where people lived their entire lives, where the accumulated knowledge of farming and herding passed from parents to children, where traditions were born and maintained. In the Zagros Mountains of Iran, at a site called Ganj Dareh, something equally significant was occurring around 5000 BC. Here, people were not merely hunting wild goats opportunistically. They were selectively penning them, controlling their breeding, beginning the long process we call domestication. This represents one of the earliest sites for goat domestication anywhere in the world. The shift from hunting wild animals to managing domestic herds is profound. It requires patience, observation, understanding of animal behavior. At Ganj Dareh, archaeologists found something intriguing: caches of goat skulls within buildings. These weren't simply discarded bones from meals. They were deliberately collected, carefully placed. This suggests ritual activity, perhaps feasting with ceremonial significance. These skull caches hint at the spiritual life of these early pastoralists, at beliefs and practices surrounding their herds, at the ways they marked important occasions or honored the animals that sustained them. Not far from Ganj Dareh, at a place called Haji Firuz Tepe, archaeologists made a discovery that brings these ancient peoples suddenly closer to our own experience. In pottery jars dating to between roughly 5400 and 5000 BC, chemical analysis revealed residues of wine. This is the world's oldest chemical evidence of wine production, of grapes deliberately fermented to create an intoxicating beverage. Think of what this means. These Neolithic villagers had learned not just to grow food, but to transform it, to create something that served social and perhaps ceremonial purposes. Wine, then as now, was likely part of feasting, of gatherings, of celebrations. Let us now drift westward, to the Nile Valley, to Egypt. Between approximately 5500 and 3100 BC, a series of cultures we call pre-dynastic flourished along the Nile. These include the Badarian culture and the Naqada cultures, which developed settled farming communities in the rich alluvial soil left by the river's annual floods. The Nile was Egypt's lifeline, predictable in its flooding, generous in the fertility it brought. The pre-dynastic peoples learned to work with the river's rhythms, planting after the floods receded, harvesting before they returned. One of the most significant of these early Egyptian settlements was Merimde, located near the Nile Delta and thriving from roughly 5000 to 4200 BC. This was no small hamlet. Estimates suggest that Merimde may have housed up to 16,000 residents at its height, making it one of the largest settlements of its time anywhere in the world. The people of Merimde used stone tools, as was typical for the period, but they also had access to early copper, marking the very beginning of metallurgy in this region. The scale of Merimde reminds us that even in these early times, some communities were growing to sizes that required coordination, leadership, ways of managing resources and resolving disputes. Slightly later, between approximately 4600 and 4400 BC, the El Omari culture emerged near modern Cairo. These semi-permanent settlements featured deep storage pits, carefully lined with woven baskets, where grain could be kept safe from moisture and pests. But the El Omari people weren't just storing grain. Archaeological evidence suggests they were producing beer, fermenting grain to create another beverage that could be preserved longer than fresh grain, and that provided both nutrition and pleasure. Beer in ancient times was often thick, nutritious, consumed as much for sustenance as for its mild intoxicating effects. Let us journey now to China, to the Yellow River Valley, where around 4800 BC, a village called Bampo was founded. Bampo represents an early permanently settled farming community in what would become one of the world's great civilizational centers. The villagers built semi-subterranean houses, dwellings partially dug into the earth for insulation against both summer heat and winter cold. They created storage pits for grain, and produced distinctive painted pottery, decorated with fish motifs and geometric designs. Bampo's layout reveals planning and organization. The central area contained communal buildings, while residential dwellings surrounded them in an orderly pattern. To the south, along the Yangtze River, the Himudu culture was developing between roughly 5000 and 4500 BC. These people had mastered wet rice cultivation, growing rice in paddies where water could be carefully controlled. The Himudu people built stilt houses over water, ingenious structures that provided protection from flooding while taking advantage of aquatic resources. These houses, raised on wooden pilings, show sophisticated woodworking skills. Indeed, the Himudu left behind an array of wooden tools and even lacquer ware, evidence of advanced techniques for working with wood and natural resins to create durable, even beautiful, objects. Further west in South Asia, at a site called Koldua in Uttar Pradesh, archaeologists discovered some of the earliest evidence of wet rice farming in the region. Dating to between roughly 6500 and 5000 BC, the domesticated rice grains found here represent a parallel innovation to what was happening in China. The people of Koldua used husking stones to remove the inedible outer layer of rice grains, a laborious but necessary process. This site, on the Gangetic Plain, shows that the agricultural revolution was not a single event, but occurred independently in multiple regions. Finally, let us travel to the Americas, to Amazonia, where around 5000 BC, indigenous groups were domesticating manioc, also known as cassava, along with various fruit palms. Manioc is a starchy root crop well suited to tropical conditions, but it presents a challenge. In its wild form, and even in many domesticated varieties, manioc contains toxic compounds that must be removed before the root is safe to eat. The fact that Amazonian peoples learned to process manioc, developing techniques to leach out these toxins, speaks to sophisticated food technology and careful observation over generations. The domestication of manioc and fruit palms allowed denser populations to live in tropical forests, supporting communities that would develop their own rich cultural traditions in the millennia to come. As we reflect on this opening segment of our journey, certain patterns emerge. Across multiple continents, separated by vast distances, human communities were independently discovering the principles of agriculture, of domestication, of settled life. They were learning to modify their environments, to store food, to plan for the future. They were building permanent homes, creating pottery and tools, developing techniques for processing and preserving food. And in many places, we see evidence of communal activity, of ritual, of the social and spiritual dimensions of life that go beyond mere survival. These villages, from Iraq to Pakistan, from Turkmenistan to Egypt, from China to South America, were the nurseries of civilization. In them, children learned not the routes of game animals, but the seasons for planting and harvest. In them, specialists began to emerge, people particularly skilled at pottery making or woodworking or managing stored grain. In them, traditions developed, ways of doing things that were passed down and became, in time, the distinctive characteristics of cultures. The story of these early farming communities is not one of sudden transformation, but of gradual change, of innovations accumulated over generations, of hard-won knowledge about soils and seeds, about animals and their needs, about water and its management. It is a story of patience and observation, of countless small decisions that, in aggregate, reshaped human existence and set us on the path toward the complex societies we would eventually build. And so we conclude this first segment of our journey, having traveled from 5500 BC to around 4000 BC, having visited the earliest farmers and villagers across the ancient world. In our next segment, we will continue this exploration, watching as these village cultures grew, as new technologies emerged, as the foundations laid here supported ever more elaborate social structures. But for now, rest easy in the knowledge that you have walked, in imagination, through the villages of our distant ancestors. those patient cultivators and careful builders who gave us the gift of settled life. Chapter 2. Early Technology and Status Symbols. As we continue our gentle exploration of the period from 5500 to 4000 BC, we turn our attention now to the emergence of new technologies and the development of symbols that marked status, ritual, and power. In the previous segment, we examined how communities learned to farm, to settle, to store their harvests. Now we will see how those same communities began to express themselves through art and innovation, how they developed technologies that would transform human capability, and how social distinctions began to appear, marked by special objects and monuments. Let us begin once more in the Amazon basin, where between roughly 6000 and 5000 BC, some of the earliest known ceramics in the Americas were being produced. This is a significant discovery, for it demonstrates that pottery technology arose independently in the New World, separate from its development in the Old World. Pottery represents a fundamental leap in human technology. The ability to fire clay, to transform soft earth into hard, waterproof vessels, requires understanding of materials and heat, requires experimentation with temperatures and firing times. These early Amazonian potters were discovering these principles on their own, creating containers that could hold liquids, store food, and serve ceremonial purposes. Around the same time, approximately 5500 BC, far across the world in southeastern Europe, another technological breakthrough was occurring. At sites such as Ploknik and Belivode, in what is now Serbia, archaeologists have found evidence for copper smelting. This is among the very earliest experimentation with metals anywhere in the world. Think of what this represents. Someone at some point observed that certain greenish stones behaved differently when placed in a very hot fire. They noticed that these stones could melt, that the molten material could be shaped, that it would harden again into something useful. Copper, while soft compared to later metals like bronze and iron, was still harder and more durable than stone for many purposes. These early copper workers in southeastern Europe were standing at the threshold of the Metal Ages, though they could not have known it. They were beginning a trajectory that would lead, eventually, to the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, to technologies that would reshape warfare, agriculture, and craft production. In Mesopotamia, at a site called Chogomomi in what is now Iraq, something equally remarkable was taking shape around 5500 BC. Here, the inhabitants constructed multi-story mud brick temples, buildings with niches and buttresses, architectural elaborations that went beyond simple functional shelter. These are among the earliest examples of monumental architecture in Mesopotamia. Buildings designed not just to house activities, but to impress, to inspire, to elevate the sacred above the mundane. But Chogomomi has yielded another treasure as well, one that hints at the origins of writing itself. Here, archaeologists discovered the first evidence of proto-cuneiform clay tokens, small objects used for counting and tracking goods. These tokens are the ancestors of the cuneiform writing that would emerge in Sumer a couple of millennia later. Imagine the cognitive leap required to represent a real object, a jar of grain or a sheep, with an abstract token, and to use these tokens to keep accounts, to remember who owns what, who owes whom. These humble clay objects represent the beginnings of record-keeping, of accounting, of the ability to track complex economic relationships beyond what human memory alone could manage. By around 5000 BC, hierarchical societies were emerging in southeastern Europe. This is a major transition in human social organization. In earlier, smaller communities, differences in status were often minimal or temporary. A particularly skilled hunter might be respected, but that respect didn't necessarily translate into permanent power or the ability to pass advantages to one's children. But with larger populations, with surplus production, with specialized crafts, more complex social structures became possible and, perhaps, inevitable. Some individuals and families began to accumulate more resources, more prestige, more influence. In Jordan, at a place called Ain Ghazal, something extraordinary was happening between roughly 7,250 and 5,000 BC. The people of this farming village were creating life-sized plaster statues, human figures over a meter tall, about 3.3 feet, with eyes made of bitumen, that black, viscous substance that seeps from the earth. These statues were not displayed publicly, but were buried in ritual caches, carefully placed and hidden. When archaeologists uncovered them thousands of years later, they found themselves face to face with the ancestors of Ein Ghazal, or perhaps with their gods. We cannot know for certain what these figures represented. Were they portraits of actual individuals, venerated ancestors whose memories were kept alive? Were they representations of deities, supernatural beings who protected the village or ensured good harvests? What we can say is that the creation of such large, detailed human figures represents considerable artistic skill and communal investment. And then, for reasons we can only speculate about, these powerful figures were buried, hidden away, perhaps as part of rituals about which we know nothing. To the northwest, in the Balkans, the Vinca culture that flourished between approximately 5,700 and 4,200 BC has left us another tantalizing puzzle. The Vinca people produced clay tablets inscribed with repeated symbols, geometric shapes, and stylized figures arranged in patterns. These markings are considered Europe's earliest proto-writing system. The symbols are not random decorations, but seem to carry meaning, perhaps tracking goods, recording rituals, or encoding information we can no longer decipher. Far to the east, in what is now northeastern China, the Hongshan culture that flourished between roughly 4,700 and 2,900 BC was creating objects of extraordinary beauty and significance. The Hongshan carved ritual jade dragons, serpentine forms crafted from nephrite jade, a stone prized for its hardness and translucent beauty. They also constructed altar complexes, special spaces for ritual activities. These jade dragons are among East Asia's earliest elite symbols, objects that clearly mark their possessors as people of special status. Jade working requires immense skill and patience. Jade is extremely hard, and shaping it with Neolithic tools would have been a slow, laborious process, requiring hours upon hours of grinding and polishing. The investment of time and skill in these objects means they were precious, reserved for important purposes and important people. The dragon would become one of the central symbols in Chinese culture, associated with power, water, and the heavens. In these Hongshan jades, we see perhaps the origins of that symbolism. In northern Europe, between approximately 4,300 and 2,800 BC, a culture we call the funnel beaker culture, named after their distinctive pottery, was erecting dolmen tombs. These are megalithic structures, monuments built of large stones, creating burial chambers that often served entire communities over generations. The term dolmen comes from Breton words meaning stone table, describing the typical form, large upright stones supporting a massive capstone. These tombs required considerable labor to construct. The stones had to be quarried or found, moved, sometimes over considerable distances, and then raised into position. This communal effort speaks to shared beliefs about death and the afterlife, about honoring the dead, about creating permanent markers that connected the living to those who had gone before. Indeed, in northern France, in Brittany, stands one of Europe's oldest megalithic complexes, the Barnenez cairn, built around 4,850 BC. This is a massive stone structure, a burial mound containing multiple chambers, constructed more than 1,500 years before the Egyptian pyramids. When we think of ancient monuments, our minds often turn to Egypt, to the pyramids rising from the desert sands. But here in coastal France, centuries before the first Egyptian dynasty, Neolithic communities were already building in stone, creating monuments designed to last through the ages. The Barnenez cairn is approximately 75 meters long, about 246 feet, containing 11 passage graves built of granite and other local stones. The scale of this undertaking is impressive. Thousands of stones had to be gathered and placed, The structure had to be planned, the chambers aligned, the passages constructed to bear weight and remain accessible. This required leadership, organization, shared vision. As we consider these developments across the ancient world, from the Amazon to the Balkans, from China to northwestern Europe, we see several common threads. We see the emergence of specialized crafts, the creation of objects that go beyond simple utility to carry symbolic meaning. We see the appearance of social hierarchies, marked by differential access to prestige goods, by elaborate burials for some and simple ones for others. We see experimentation with new technologies, particularly ceramics and metallurgy, technologies that would reshape human capability in profound ways. And we see the construction of monuments, structures that required communal labor and expressed communal beliefs. These developments did not occur suddenly. They were gradual, the result of countless individual innovations and decisions accumulated over centuries. A person who lived at the beginning of this period, around 5,500 BC, and somehow lived to its end, around 4,000 BC, would likely not have perceived dramatic change. Life would have seemed much the same year to year. But over the span of generations, over 1,500 years, these incremental changes added up to a transformation. In all of this, we see humans not merely adapting to their environments, but actively shaping them, expressing through objects and structures their beliefs, their social relationships, their aspirations. The jade dragon speaks of cosmology and status. The clay tablet speaks of commerce and memory. The megalithic tomb speaks of death and continuity. These are not people concerned only with survival, with finding the next meal. These are people with rich interior lives, with beliefs about the sacred, with social bonds that extended beyond immediate kinship. As we conclude this segment, we have moved through 15 centuries, from 5,500 to around 4,000 BC, examining the technological and symbolic developments that accompanied the settled agricultural life we explored previously. We have seen pottery arise independently in different parts of the world. We have watched metals begin to be smelted and worked. We have examined temples and tombs, statues and symbols. We have observed the emergence of social hierarchies and the creation of objects and monuments that mark status and express belief. In our next segment, we will continue this journey, exploring further developments in technology, society, and culture as we move deeper into the 4th millennium BC. But for now, rest in the knowledge that you have traced the early expressions of human creativity and social complexity, those first faltering steps toward the elaborate civilizations that would eventually arise. The people we have met in this segment, the copper smelters of the Balkans, the jade carvers of China, the megalith builders of France, the statue makers of Jordan, live on in their creations, in the objects and monuments they left behind, speaking to us across the millennia in the universal language of human aspiration. Rest well, and let these ancient voices drift through your thoughts like gentle whispers from the distant past. Part 2. The Rise of Complex Societies and Early Cities, circa 4000 BC to 3300 BC. Chapter 3. Urbanism and State Development in Mesopotamia. We now enter a new phase of our journey through ancient history, moving into the period from roughly 4000 to 3300 BC. This is an era of acceleration, when the villages and farming communities we have been observing begin to coalesce into something larger, something unprecedented in human experience. We are witnessing the birth of cities, the emergence of states, the development of technologies that would remain fundamental to human civilization for millennia to come. Our focus in this segment will be on Mesopotamia, that land between the rivers, where the Tigris and Euphrates flow through what is now Iraq, and where some of humanity's most transformative developments first took shape. But before we examine the rise of cities proper, we must understand what came before. The Ubaid culture, which occupied southern Mesopotamia from approximately 6,500 to 3,800 BC, laid essential groundwork for everything that followed. This was a long-lasting, stable cultural tradition, enduring for nearly 3 millennia. The Ubaid people lived in large villages, settlements that were more substantial than earlier farming hamlets, but not yet cities in the full sense. What distinguishes these Ubaid communities is their organization around temples. At the center of Ubaid settlements stood temple complexes, religious structures that were also economic and administrative hubs. The Ubaid culture spread across southern Mesopotamia and beyond, creating a remarkably homogeneous material culture. Wherever archaeologists find Ubaid pottery, with its distinctive painted designs, they find similar architectural styles, similar religious practices. This suggests extensive contact between settlements, perhaps trade networks, shared pilgrimage sites, or even some form of loose cultural unity. The Ubaid period was one of gradual intensification, of populations slowly growing, of irrigation systems expanding, of social structures becoming more elaborate. It was a time of preparation, of laying foundations upon which later civilizations would build. By around 4000 to 3500 BC, something remarkable was happening in southern Mesopotamia. Large settlements such as Uruk were growing into some of the world's earliest true cities. What makes a city different from a large village? This is not merely a question of population size, though size matters. A city is distinguished by density of population, by specialization of labor, by monumental public architecture, by administrative complexity. Cities are places where not everyone grows their own food, where different people perform different functions, where potters and metalworkers and scribes and priests and merchants live in proximity, depending on one another, creating elaborate webs of economic and social relationships. Uruk, which would eventually become the largest city in the world during its peak in the late 4th millennium BC, exemplifies this urban transformation. The site covered hundreds of hectares, vastly larger than earlier settlements. It contained massive temple complexes, administrative buildings, craft workshops, residential neighborhoods. Tens of thousands of people lived within its boundaries and in the surrounding villages that supplied it with food and raw materials. The city required organization, required ways to manage water supply and waste disposal, required systems to distribute food to those who did not grow it themselves, required methods to resolve disputes and maintain order among large numbers of people living in close proximity. Central to these emerging cities were their temples, and in the late 4th millennium BC, Mesopotamian cities were building elevated temple platforms, structures that were precursors to the ziggurats that would later dominate the landscape. These were artificial mountains, mounds of brick raising temples above the surrounding plain, bringing them closer to the heavens, making them visible from afar. The construction of such platforms required enormous quantities of mud brick, required thousands of workers laboring over extended periods. These temples functioned as religious, administrative, and economic centers all at once. In the ancient Mesopotamian worldview, these functions were not separate. The gods owned the land and the city. The temple was the god's household, and its priests managed the god's estates. They collected offerings and tithes. They organized agricultural labor on temple lands. They operated workshops where craft goods were produced. They stored surplus grain and distributed rations to workers. They engaged in trade, exchanging surplus for materials not available locally. The temple was bank, warehouse, factory, and sanctuary all in one. To the north, at a site called Tepe Gora, in what is now northern Iraq, we can observe the administrative machinery that was developing to manage these increasingly complex societies. Tepe Gora, occupied from roughly 4500 to 3500 BC, served as an administrative hub, a center for coordinating economic activity across a region. Archaeologists excavating the site found seal impressions, marks left in clay by engraved seals pressed or rolled onto the surface. These seal impressions were found on clay lumps that had sealed containers and storerooms, and on clay tablets that documented transactions. The seals themselves, both round stamp seals and cylinder seals, bore distinctive designs that identified their owners. When a sealed container arrived at its destination, the intact seal impression guaranteed that it had not been opened in transit, that its contents had not been tampered with. When a tablet recorded a transaction, the seal impressions of the parties involved authenticated the document, made it official. This is the beginning of bureaucracy, the creation of systems to track goods and obligations, to create accountability, to manage complexity. All of this administrative complexity, all of this tracking and recording, created pressure for better systems of documentation. By 3500 BC, a form of proto-writing was emerging in Mesopotamia. This began with clay tokens, small geometric shapes representing different commodities. Cones for grain, spheres for oil, different shapes for sheep, cattle, textiles. These tokens could be enclosed in clay envelopes called bulli, with seal impressions on the outside identifying the parties to a transaction. But then someone realized that instead of sealing actual tokens inside, you could make impressions of the tokens on the outside of the envelope, recording their shapes in the clay surface. By the late 4th millennium BC, this system was evolving into cuneiform writing, one of humanity's earliest true writing systems. Cuneiform means wedge-shaped, referring to the impressions made by pressing a reed stylus into soft clay. The earliest cuneiform texts are primarily economic documents, inventories and accounts, records of goods received and distributed by temples. But the technology, once developed, could be and would be used for many other purposes. Royal inscriptions, law codes, diplomatic correspondence, literature, history. Writing is perhaps the most transformative technology humans have ever developed. It allows knowledge to accumulate across generations with unprecedented fidelity. Around 3500 BC, another innovation appears prominently in the archaeological record: cylinder seals. While stamp seals, which were pressed into clay, had existed earlier, cylinder seals represented a refinement. These were small cylinders, often made of stone, engraved with intricate designs and cuneiform inscriptions. When rolled across wet clay, they created a continuous band of imagery and text. Cylinder seals were used to authenticate documents, to seal containers and storerooms, to mark property. Each seal was unique, a kind of signature identifying its owner. And then, sometime around 3500 to 3300 BC, another innovation appears in Mesopotamia and surrounding areas: wheeled vehicles. The evidence comes in several forms. We find clay models of carts and wagons in burials. We find depictions of wheeled vehicles in art. We find wheel ruts preserved in ancient roadways. The wheel is one of those inventions that seems, in retrospect, obvious, but it required several conceptual leaps. The wheel and axle must work together as a system. The axle must be able to rotate freely, or the wheels must rotate freely on the axle. The earliest wheels were solid, made from planks of wood fastened together and cut into circular shape. Spoked wheels, which are lighter and stronger, would come later. These early wheeled vehicles would have been slow, heavy, cumbersome, but they could carry loads far larger than a human or even a donkey could carry. They transformed transport, made it possible to move goods over longer distances with less effort. As we reflect on this segment, on Mesopotamia between 4000 and 3300 BC, we are witnessing a cascade of transformations, each enabling others, each accelerating the pace of change. Villages grow into cities. Temples become not just religious centers, but administrative and economic institutions managing complex societies. Record-keeping systems evolve from tokens to writing. Seals authenticate transactions and ownership. Wheels revolutionize transport and craft production. These changes are interconnected. Each innovation makes others more useful, more necessary. But we should also recognize what these transformations meant for the people living through them. For many, life likely became harder in some ways, even as it became more secure in others. Living in cities meant living in crowded conditions. It meant exposure to epidemic diseases that could spread rapidly through dense populations. It meant living under authorities, temple administrators, and emerging kings, who could compel labor and extract taxes. Yet cities also offered opportunities, possibilities that villages could not. Cities were centers of learning and innovation. They brought together people with different skills and knowledge. They were places where arts and crafts could develop to high levels of sophistication. Cities were, and remain, engines of cultural creativity and change. The Mesopotamia we have examined in this segment was on the cusp of even greater transformations. By the end of the 4th millennium BC, city-states would be fully formed, with kings claiming divine authority, with armies and warfare, with elaborate temple complexes and palaces, with writing systems capable of recording not just accounts but stories and laws and history. As we conclude this segment, we have traced the emergence of urbanism and state development in Mesopotamia, watching as villages became cities, as temples became institutions managing complex societies, as record-keeping became writing, as new technologies like the wheel transformed human capabilities. We have stood at a threshold, observing the birth of a new form of human society. In our next segment, we will continue exploring this transformative period, looking beyond Mesopotamia to other regions where similar processes were unfolding, where societies were growing more complex, where innovations were emerging that would shape the future. But for now, rest in the contemplation of these ancient cities, of Uruk rising from the alluvial plain, of temples on their elevated platforms reaching toward the heavens, of scribes pressing their styluses into clay tablets, recording the transactions and thoughts of a people who were inventing, day by day, the foundations of civilization. Chapter 4: Egyptian Development and African Climate Change. We turn our attention now to Egypt, to the Nile Valley, where parallel developments were unfolding during this same transformative period from roughly 4000 to 3300 BC. Egypt would eventually become one of the ancient world's most spectacular civilizations, a land of pyramids and pharaohs, of hieroglyphs and elaborate religious beliefs. But in this earlier period, Egypt was still finding its way, still developing the cultural traditions and technologies that would later coalesce into the unified kingdom we associate with ancient Egypt. And crucially, Egypt's development was shaped by environmental changes, by the transformation of the Sahara from a habitable landscape into the vast desert we know today. Let us begin with a date that reaches even further back than our current period, around 4241 BC. This date is traditionally cited as one of the earliest recorded dates in the Egyptian calendar, linked to careful observations of the star Sirius and its relationship to the Nile's flood cycle. Now, we must approach this date with some caution. The ancient Egyptians themselves later calculated backwards to establish dates for their early history, and this particular date may be more legendary than historical. But what it represents is certainly historical: the Egyptian practice of astronomical observation and the development of a calendar based on the natural cycles that govern their lives. The Nile was Egypt's lifeline, and the Nile's annual flood was the defining event of the Egyptian year. Each summer, fed by monsoon rains in the Ethiopian highlands far to the south, the Nile would swell and overflow its banks, depositing rich silt across the floodplain. This flooding was remarkably predictable, occurring at approximately the same time each year. The Egyptians noticed that the heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, the moment when it became visible on the eastern horizon, just before sunrise after a period of invisibility, coincided with the beginning of the flood season. The development of a calendar based on these observations represents sophisticated astronomical knowledge and the social organization to maintain and transmit that knowledge across generations. It required patient observation over many years to establish the correlations. It required a class of specialists, perhaps priests, who maintained this knowledge and performed the observations. It represents an understanding that the cosmos operates according to regular patterns, that these patterns can be understood through careful study. By around 4200 BC, Egyptians were already mining and smelting copper. This places Egypt among the early adopters of metallurgy, though not quite as early as some regions of southeastern Europe or the Near East that we examined earlier. The copper deposits of the Sinai Peninsula and the Eastern Desert provided raw material, but extracting copper ore and smelting it into usable metal required organized labor, specialized knowledge, and considerable effort. Mining copper was dangerous, difficult work. The mines were often in remote, inhospitable locations. Smelting required even more specialized knowledge. The ore had to be heated to very high temperatures, around 1,100 degrees Celsius, 2,012 degrees Fahrenheit, in furnaces carefully designed to achieve and maintain such heat. Charcoal provided the fuel, but bellows or some other means of forcing air into the furnace were necessary to reach the required temperatures. This knowledge was technical, practical, accumulated through experimentation, and passed down from master to apprentice. Between approximately 4,000 and 3,500 BC, during what archaeologists call the Amratian or Nakadari period, potters in Upper Egypt, the southern part of the Nile Valley, were developing distinctive pottery styles. These were red polished wares, vessels covered with a red slip and burnished to a shine, then decorated with white-filled designs. The decorations depicted boats and animals, subjects that would remain central to Egyptian art for millennia to come. The boats are particularly interesting. They show sailing vessels with multiple oars and distinctive high prows. These boats plied the Nile, carrying people and goods up and down the river, the great highway that connected Upper and Lower Egypt. Around 3,500 BC, a dramatic environmental change was occurring across North Africa. The African humid period was ending. For thousands of years, the Sahara had been a much more hospitable place than it is today. It had received substantially more rainfall, supporting grasslands, lakes, rivers. Archaeological evidence shows that people lived throughout what is now desert, herding cattle, hunting game, creating rock art depicting the animals and activities of their lives. But climatic shifts, likely related to changes in Earth's orbital parameters and their effects on monsoon patterns, were causing the region to dry out. This aridification was rapid in geological terms, though still gradual from a human perspective, occurring over centuries. Lakes shrank and disappeared. Grasslands withered. Rivers ceased to flow. The people who had inhabited these regions faced stark choices: adapt to increasingly harsh conditions, migrate to areas with more reliable water sources, or perish. Many moved toward the Nile Valley, toward the one water source in the region that never failed. The Nile, fed by rains far to the south in equatorial Africa, continued to flow regardless of local conditions. It became a refuge, a narrow green ribbon through an expanding desert. This influx of population into the Nile Valley had profound effects on Egyptian development. It increased population density, brought together people from different regions with different traditions and skills. It created pressure on resources, necessitating more intensive agriculture, more sophisticated irrigation systems, better social organization to manage conflicts over land and water. Some scholars argue that this climate-driven migration and concentration of population was one of the factors that accelerated Egypt's trajectory towards social complexity and eventual unification. The desiccation of the Sahara also isolated Egypt to some degree, surrounding it with hostile desert that made travel difficult, that created natural barriers. This isolation would later contribute to Egypt's cultural distinctiveness, to the development of a civilization that, while it certainly interacted with neighbors, maintained a strong internal coherence and continuity over millennia. The desert was both barrier and protector, limiting invasion while also limiting extensive contact with other regions. Around this same time, approximately 3,500 BC, we find in Egypt evidence of deliberate mummification, the artificial preservation of the dead. Natural mummification had occurred in Egypt long before this. Bodies buried in the hot, dry sand of the desert would often desiccate before they could decompose, preserving skin, hair, even facial features. The Egyptians observed these naturally preserved bodies when, for various reasons, graves were reopened. They may have believed that preservation of the body was connected to survival in the afterlife. Deliberate mummification took this natural process and systematized it, enhanced it, made it more reliable. The earliest deliberate mummification was quite simple compared to the elaborate procedures of later periods. It might involve wrapping the body in linen soaked with resin, or coating it with substances that help preserve it. But even these simple procedures represent important cognitive and cultural developments. They represent a belief system in which the physical body, or something connected to it, persists after death. As we consider Egypt during this period, we see a society in transition. The old pre-dynastic cultures we examined in our first segment were giving way to something more complex. Population was increasing, concentrated along the Nile by the desiccation of the surrounding regions. Copper working provided better tools. Distinctive artistic traditions were emerging, visible in pottery and other crafts. Religious beliefs about death and the afterlife were developing, leading to mummification practices. Astronomical observations were being systematized into calendar keeping. The foundations were being laid for the dramatic developments that would occur in the subsequent centuries. But in this period, Egypt was still fragmented politically, divided into various local chiefdoms and proto-kingdoms. The unification that would create the Egypt of the pharaohs was still in the future, though it was approaching. The forces that would drive that unification were building: population pressure, competition for resources, the advantages that larger, more organized polities could achieve over smaller ones. The story of Egypt is often told as if it emerged fully formed, as if the pyramid builders and hieroglyph writers appeared suddenly from nowhere. But as we have seen in this segment, Egyptian civilization had deep roots, centuries of development before the unification and before the first pyramids. The Egypt of 3500 BC was a society that had already achieved considerable sophistication in multiple domains: technology, art, religious thought, astronomical observation. It was a society shaped by its environment, by the Nile's rhythms and by the desert's expansion. A society learning to organize itself to meet challenges and exploit opportunities. In our examination of both Mesopotamia in the previous segment and Egypt in this one, we can observe parallel processes occurring in different environments and cultures. In both regions, populations were growing and concentrating. In both, social hierarchies were becoming more pronounced. In both, specialized crafts and knowledge were developing. In both, religious institutions were taking on economic and administrative roles. In both, technologies were advancing, particularly in metallurgy and pottery. And in both, we can see the groundwork being laid for the emergence of states. Yet the specific paths these societies took, the particular institutions they developed, the cultural forms they created, were distinctively their own, shaped by local environments, local histories, local innovations. Mesopotamia, with its multiple rivers and less predictable flooding, with its lack of natural boundaries, would develop a pattern of competing city-states frequently at war with one another. Egypt, with its single great river flowing through protective deserts, would develop a more unified, centralized state with stronger ideological emphasis on cosmic order and divine kingship. As we conclude this segment, we have journeyed up the Nile, observing potters shaping their red-burnished vessels, copper workers smelting or in their furnaces, priests observing the stars and marking the calendar, mourners carefully wrapping their dead in preserving linens. We have felt the climate shifting, the rains failing, the desert advancing, and populations moving toward the eternal river that never disappoints. We have watched a distinctive Egyptian culture taking shape, developing the traditions and technologies that would support one of history's most enduring civilizations. In our next segment, we will continue our exploration of this transformative period, looking to other regions of the world, examining the diverse ways that human societies were responding to similar challenges, developing their own distinctive paths toward complexity. But for now, rest in the contemplation of the Nile, that great river flowing northward through the desert, bringing life to a narrow ribbon of green, sustaining the communities that clustered along its banks, shaping the rhythms of their lives through its reliable, annual floods. A gift of the gods, the foundation of Egyptian civilization. Chapter 5. Eurasian Connections and Technology. We broaden our view now, looking beyond the river valleys of Mesopotamia and Egypt to examine developments across the vast expanse of Eurasia and beyond. In this segment, we will travel from the steppes of Central Asia to the forests of Northern Europe, from the rice paddies of China to the wetlands of Australia. What we will observe is a world increasingly connected, where technologies and ideas spread across vast distances, where different societies were finding their own solutions to similar challenges, and where innovations in one region would eventually reshape life in many others. Let us begin on the steppes, those vast grasslands stretching from Ukraine through Central Asia. Between approximately 4,400 and 4,000 BC, somewhere in this immense region, humans achieved one of the most consequential animal domestications in history, the horse. The domestication of horses would, over time, transform human society in profound ways, revolutionizing transport, warfare, and communication. But in these early stages, the process was likely gradual and tentative. Wild horses had roamed the steppes for millennia, and humans had hunted them for meat. At some point, perhaps by observing the relationships between foals and mares, perhaps through trial and error over generations, people learned to catch and manage horses, to control their breeding, to ride them or harness them to pull loads. The archaeological evidence for early horse domestication is subtle and contested. It includes changes in tooth wear patterns that might indicate horses wearing bits, changes in leg bone proportions that might indicate carrying riders. The advantages of domesticated horses would not have been immediately obvious. Early domestic horses were smaller than modern horses, perhaps not much larger than ponies. They could not carry a fully grown man easily at first, but they could pull wheeled carts, increasing the load that could be transported. They could be ridden, if awkwardly at first, allowing herders to manage larger areas and larger flocks. And over generations of selective breeding, horses would become larger, stronger, faster. Around 3,600 BC, in Southwest Asia, metalworkers made a discovery that would give this next era of human history its name: the Bronze Age. They learned to alloy copper with tin, creating bronze, a metal that was harder and more durable than pure copper. This was not a simple or obvious discovery. Tin is relatively rare, not found in the same locations as copper. Someone had to try mixing different metals, had to experiment with proportions, had to observe that this particular combination produced superior results. Bronze could hold a sharper edge than copper, making better tools and weapons. It was less brittle, less prone to breaking under stress. It could be cast more easily into complex shapes. The development of bronze technology would drive long-distance trade. As societies with copper but no tin, or tin but no copper, sought to obtain both materials. In Central Europe, around 4000 BC, farmers were adopting a technology that would greatly increase agricultural productivity: the wooden plough. Earlier farming had relied on digging sticks and hoes, tools that broke up the soil in small patches, but required immense labor to prepare fields. The plough, pulled by oxen or other draft animals, could turn soil over large areas much more quickly. This was particularly important for the heavier, clay-rich soils of Northern Europe, which were difficult to work with hand tools, but could be very productive if properly cultivated. The plough was a simple technology in principle, but required several elements to work together. It required draft animals, domesticated cattle strong enough to pull the plough through resistant soil. It required the ability to make and maintain the plough itself, to shape wood into the right form, to attach the blade that would cut through the earth. And it required fields large enough and clear enough to make ploughing worthwhile. The spread of ploughing technology across Europe reflects the spread of this agricultural system. And indeed, around 4000 BC, farming itself was spreading into Northern Europe. Agricultural hubs were appearing in southern Scandinavia, founded by incoming farming groups from the south. For thousands of years, northern Europe had been home to hunter-gatherers, people who lived by fishing, hunting game, and gathering wild plants. The forests and coastal waters of Scandinavia were productive, capable of supporting substantial populations without agriculture. But farming groups from Central Europe were pushing northward, bringing with them domesticated crops and animals, pottery and polished stone tools. Across the continent in China, along the lower Yangtze River, another culture was developing between approximately 4000 and 3000 BC that would leave a lasting mark on Chinese civilization, the Liangzhu culture. The Liangzhu people are known particularly for their jade work, producing finely carved jade ritual objects that are among the masterpieces of ancient Chinese art. Two forms are particularly characteristic: the tsong, a tube-like object square on the outside and round on the inside, and the bai-disc, a flat ring of jade with a circular hole in the center. These objects required extraordinary skill to produce. Jade is extremely hard, and working it with Neolithic tools required endless patience. Sawing and grinding and polishing with abrasive sands over weeks or months to create a single piece. The tsong and bai were not utilitarian objects. They were ritual items, perhaps representing cosmological principles. Some scholars suggest that the round bai represented heaven, while the square tsong represented earth, though we cannot be certain of their ancient meanings. The Liangzhu culture developed sophisticated water control systems, building dams and levees to manage the wetlands and rivers of the Yangtze Delta. They constructed large earthen platforms for important buildings. They produced distinctive pottery and other crafts. In their complex water management, their ritual jade objects, their social hierarchies, we can see a society well along the path toward state formation. Finally, let us travel to Australia, a continent that would not experience agriculture until European colonization in the 18th century, but where indigenous populations developed their own sophisticated resource management techniques. In Western Victoria, around 5000 BC, or even earlier, Aboriginal Australians constructed elaborate fish and eel traps. Engineering systems with channels up to 3 kilometers, or about 1.9 miles long, designed for systematic wetland exploitation. These were not simple weirs or small traps, but sophisticated aquacultural systems. Channels were dug to direct water and fish. Stone walls were built to create pools where eels and fish could be trapped. Barriers were woven from branches and reeds. The systems took advantage of the seasonal movements of eels, which migrate from the ocean up rivers and streams to freshwater habitats where they spend most of their lives, then return to the ocean to spawn. These fish trap systems required detailed knowledge of eel behavior, hydrology, and engineering principles. They required communal labor to construct and maintain. They supported relatively dense, semi-sedentary populations, people who could rely on the abundant eel harvests, and did not need to move constantly in search of resources. Some of these trap systems were maintained and used for thousands of years, representing sustainable resource management on a timescale that modern societies rarely achieve. The Australian example reminds us that the path to sedentism and social complexity did not require agriculture. While agriculture was the route taken by most societies that developed cities and states, it was not the only way to support larger, more settled populations. In exceptionally productive environments, whether the salmon rivers of the Pacific Northwest or the eel-rich wetlands of Victoria, hunter-gatherer-fisher societies could achieve population densities and social complexity comparable to farming societies. As we reflect on this segment, examining developments across Eurasia and even Australia, several themes emerge. We see the importance of technological innovation, the domestication of horses, the invention of bronze, the adoption of the plough, the engineering of fish traps. Each of these innovations provided advantages, allowed people to do things they could not do before, or to do them more efficiently. And while these innovations arose in specific places, they did not remain isolated. Technology spread, carried by migrants, traders, and conquerors, adapted to new environments, refined, and elaborated. We see also the theme of increasing connectivity. The Eurasian landmass, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific, was becoming increasingly integrated through networks of exchange. Ideas, technologies, and goods moved along these networks, sometimes quickly, sometimes taking centuries to spread from one end to the other. We see the diversity of human solutions to common challenges. How do you support a larger population in one place? In Mesopotamia and Egypt, the answer was irrigation agriculture. In southern Scandinavia, it was forest clearing and plowing. In the Yangtze Delta, it was wetland rice cultivation with sophisticated water management. In western Victoria, it was engineered fish traps. Each solution was tailored to local environments and resources. Each drew on local knowledge and traditions, and each created distinctive patterns of life and social organization. As we conclude this segment, and with it our entire examination of Part 2, we have traveled from 4000 to 3300 BC, watching as villages grew into cities in Mesopotamia, as Egyptian culture took distinctive form along the Nile, as horses were first domesticated on the steppes, as bronze was first produced in Southwest Asia, as plows transformed European agriculture, as jade working reached high artistry in China, and as fish traps engineered the wetlands of Australia. We have observed a world growing more complex, more connected, more capable of transforming environments and creating lasting monuments and institutions. The stage is now set for the developments of the late 4th and 3rd millennia BC, when writing would spread and become more sophisticated, when cities would proliferate and grow, when kingdoms would emerge and compete, when long-distance trade would flourish, when monumental architecture would reach new heights, and when the foundations laid in these earlier periods would support the first great civilizations whose names and deeds would be recorded for posterity. But that is a story for our next segments. For now, rest in the contemplation of this world of 4000 to 3300 BC, a world still ancient by our measures, but already so far advanced from the simple farming villages of just a few millennia earlier. Rest thinking of horses being ridden for the first time, of molten bronze being poured into molds, of plows turning heavy European soil, of jade being patiently ground and polished, of eels being guided into stone-walled traps, and of all the countless other innovations, large and small, by which our ancestors gradually built the world that would eventually become ours. Let these images drift through your mind like clouds across an ancient sky, and rest peacefully in the knowledge of human ingenuity. Part 3. The First States and Urban Expansions, circa 3300 BC to 3000 BC. Chapter 6. The Birth of Civilizations. We arrive now at one of the most pivotal moments in human history, the period from approximately 3300 to 3000 BC, when the accumulated developments of previous millennia coalesced into something new and transformative. The first true states, the first large-scale civilizations. In earlier segments, we watched as villages grew into cities, as social hierarchies emerged, as technologies advanced. Now we will see these cities organizing into states, these hierarchies crystallizing into formalized governments, these technologies supporting populations of unprecedented size and density. This is the moment when history, in the traditional sense, truly begins, when writing becomes sophisticated enough to record not just accounts but narratives, when kings and dynasties emerge whose names and deeds can be traced, when the patterns of political organization that would dominate the ancient world take definitive shape. Let us begin, as we have so often, in Mesopotamia, with the culture centered on the great city of Uruk. Between approximately 3600 and 3100 BC, what scholars call the Uruk expansion was underway. The culture of Uruk, with its distinctive pottery styles, administrative practices, and architectural forms, was spreading from southern Mesopotamia into neighboring regions. This expansion took multiple forms. In some areas, we find trading enclaves, small settlements of people from Uruk living among or near local populations, facilitating exchange of goods. In other areas, we find what appear to be colonies, larger settlements that seem to have been established by groups from Uruk, bringing their entire way of life to new territories. Why this expansion occurred remains debated. Perhaps Uruk needed resources not available in southern Mesopotamia. Timber from the mountains, metals from Anatolia or the Iranian plateau, stone for building and sculpture. Perhaps population pressure drove some groups to seek new lands. Perhaps there was an ideological or cultural impetus, a desire to spread Uruk's way of life, its religious practices, its technologies. Most likely, multiple factors were at work, with different motivations driving different aspects of the expansion. The Uruk expansion represents one of the earliest examples of what we might call imperialism or colonialism, the projection of one society's power and culture into distant regions. The enclaves and colonies maintained connections with the homeland, creating networks of exchange and communication that spanned hundreds of kilometers. Goods flowed along these networks, metals and timber from the periphery to the core, finished products and perhaps grain from Uruk to the outposts. Ideas and technologies flowed as well: writing, administrative techniques, architectural styles, religious practices. But this expansion was not permanent. By around 3100 BC, many of the distant enclaves and colonies were abandoned or transformed, as the Uruk culture withdrew or was absorbed by local populations. The reasons for this contraction are as unclear as the reasons for the initial expansion. Perhaps the networks became too costly to maintain. Perhaps local populations grew strong enough to resist or expel the Uruk presence. Perhaps changes within Uruk itself, political upheavals or economic reorganizations, made the distant outposts untenable. What remains is the archaeological evidence of this expansion and contraction. The Uruk artifacts found far from home, the architectural styles that show Uruk influence, the administrative technologies that were adopted by local populations even after Uruk itself withdrew. During this same period, between roughly 4500 and 3000 BC, Sumer in southern Mesopotamia was emerging as one of the earliest known civilizations in the full sense of that term. What makes Sumer a civilization rather than simply a culture? The term is admittedly imprecise, freighted with value judgments and contested definitions. But most scholars would agree that civilizations are characterized by cities, by complex social hierarchies with specialized occupations, by centralized political authority, by monumental architecture, by writing, and by long-distance trade. Sumer possessed all of these characteristics. Sumer was not a unified state, but a collection of city-states, independent cities, each controlling the surrounding agricultural land. The major Sumerian cities, Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Eridu, Nippur, and others, were rivals as much as they were cultural kin. They fought wars with one another over boundaries, water rights, and prestige. They competed in building ever larger temples, in claiming divine favor, in accumulating wealth through trade. Yet they shared a common language, common religious traditions, common technologies, common artistic and architectural styles. A person from Uruk would have felt foreign in Ur, but not incomprehensible, different but not alien. The population of these Sumerian cities was substantial. Uruk at its height may have housed 40,000 to 50,000 people within its walls, with many more in surrounding villages and towns. This was an extraordinary concentration of humanity, unprecedented in previous eras. Managing such populations required sophisticated organization. Food had to be brought in from the countryside or distributed from temple and palace stores. Water had to be supplied, wastes removed. Order had to be maintained, disputes resolved, public works coordinated. The temples, and increasingly, the palaces of kings provided this organization, employing scribes and administrators, accountants and overseers, creating bureaucratic systems to track resources and obligations. Long-distance trade was vital to Sumerian civilization. Southern Mesopotamia lacked many essential resources: timber, stone, metals. These had to be imported from distant regions. Timber from the Levant or Anatolia, copper from Oman or Anatolia, tin from even farther afield. Sumerian merchants and trade missions traveled widely, establishing contacts, negotiating exchanges. In return, Sumer exported textiles, particularly fine woolen cloth, and grain surpluses. The cuneiform tablets record these transactions, lists of goods received and sent, debts owed and paid, the mundane details of commercial life that sustained a complex society. By around 3000 BC, several Sumerian city-states had reached full maturity. Ur, Uruk, and Lagash were politically important centers with organized governments and temple-based economies. The temples were massive institutions, owning vast estates, employing hundreds or thousands of people: farmers, herders, craftspeople, priests, administrators. The temples collected tithes and offerings, managed agricultural production on their lands, engaged in trade, and redistributed goods to their dependents. In many ways, the temples functioned as the core economic institutions of these city-states, and religious authority was inseparable from economic power. But alongside the temples, secular authority was growing. Kings were emerging, initially perhaps as war leaders or administrators who coordinated defense and public works, but gradually accumulating power and prestige, claiming divine sanction, building palaces that rivaled temples in size and grandeur. The relationship between temple and palace, between religious and secular authority, would be a defining tension in Mesopotamian civilization for millennia to come. Let us turn now to Egypt, where parallel but distinct developments were unfolding. In the late 4th millennium BC, the Nile Valley was divided into two main political regions. Upper Egypt consisted of the long, narrow valley where the Nile flows between desert cliffs, extending from the first cataract in the south to the point where the valley opens into the broad delta. Lower Egypt was the delta itself, where the Nile fans out into multiple branches before emptying into the Mediterranean Sea. These two regions had somewhat different characters. Upper Egypt was more isolated, more unified by the river that connected all its settlements. Lower Egypt, with its multiple river branches and proximity to the Mediterranean, had more connections to the Levant and the broader Eastern Mediterranean world. Both Upper and Lower Egypt had developed complex societies by this period, with social hierarchies, craft specialization, long-distance trade. Both had towns and proto-cities, though nothing on the scale of the largest Mesopotamian cities. Both had leaders, chiefs or petty kings who controlled territories, who were buried with rich grave goods, who commanded resources. But neither had achieved full political unification. Each region contained multiple competing centers of power. Around 3100 BC, a momentous event occurred. A ruler, often identified in later tradition as Nama or Menes, unified Upper and Lower Egypt, creating one of the world's first large territorial states. This unification is commemorated on the famous Nama palette, a ceremonial cosmetic palette carved with scenes of the king wearing the crowns of both Upper and Lower Egypt, subduing enemies, receiving homage. The palette is both a work of art and a piece of propaganda, asserting the king's victory and his right to rule both regions. The process of unification was likely not a single dramatic conquest, but a more gradual process of alliance, marriage, warfare, and consolidation occurring over generations. But by around 3100 BC, one ruling lineage had achieved dominance, establishing what Egyptologists call the First Dynasty, the beginning of the early dynastic period. This unification would prove remarkably durable. For the next 3,000 years, with periodic interruptions, Egypt would be unified under single rulers, the pharaohs. The ideal of the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt united under one crown, would remain central to Egyptian kingship throughout ancient Egyptian history. The unification had profound consequences. It created a state with resources and manpower far exceeding what any single city-state could command. It allowed for large-scale projects, irrigation systems spanning long stretches of the Nile, quarrying and transport of massive stone blocks for monumental architecture, military expeditions to secure resources or prestige. It created a need for more sophisticated administrative systems to govern a territory stretching hundreds of kilometers, hundreds of miles. And it established kingship as the central organizing principle of Egyptian society, with the pharaoh as both political ruler and religious figure, the intermediary between gods and humans, the guarantor of cosmic order. To the east of Mesopotamia, on the Iranian plateau, another civilization was developing during this same period, from approximately 3,200 to 2,700 BC. The Proto-Elamite culture. Centered on the ancient city of Susa in southwestern Iran, the Proto-Elamites controlled an important zone between the Mesopotamian plain and the resource-rich regions of the Iranian interior. Susa itself was an ancient site, occupied for thousands of years, a natural hub for trade between different ecological zones. The Proto-Elamites developed their own writing system, distinct from Sumerian cuneiform, though the two systems may have influenced each other. Unfortunately, Proto-Elamite writing remains undeciphered. We can recognize that the tablets contain numerical notations and presumably economic records, similar to early Mesopotamian tablets. We can identify some signs that appear to represent commodities, but we cannot read the language, cannot access whatever narratives or administrative details these tablets might contain. This undeciphered writing system tantalizes us with the knowledge it contains, but cannot yet reveal. Despite our inability to read their texts, we know that the Proto-Elamites participated actively in extensive trade networks. They imported metals, semi-precious stones, and other materials, and they exported whatever local products they produced, perhaps textiles or agricultural goods. Their cylinder seals show artistic styles distinct from but related to Mesopotamian seals, suggesting cultural exchange while maintaining local identity. Their administrative practices, visible in the organization of their tablets and seal impressions, show sophistication comparable to contemporary Mesopotamian practices. The Proto-Elamite culture would eventually give rise to the Elamite civilization, which would endure for centuries, sometimes independent, sometimes dominated by Mesopotamian powers, always maintaining a distinctive identity. But in this early period, around 3,200 to 2,700 BC, Proto-Elam represents another example of state formation occurring in regions with the right combination of resources, population, and strategic location. Finally, let us travel east to the Indus Valley, where between approximately 3,300 and 2,600 BC, the early phases of what would become the Indus Valley or Harappan civilization were emerging. This is a civilization that would eventually rival Mesopotamia and Egypt in scale and sophistication, covering a vast area in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. But in this early period, we see only the first stirrings, the developments that would lay the foundation for the mature Harappan culture. Settlements were appearing with evidence of planning, with streets laid out in grids, with houses of standardized dimensions built of uniform bricks. This planned layout distinguishes Indus Valley sites from the more organic, irregular growth of many other ancient cities. Someone was making decisions about how settlements should be organized, and those decisions were being implemented consistently. This implies authority, coordination, shared standards. Standardized weights appear at these early sites, small stone cubes cut to specific sizes in a regular progression. These weights would have been used in commerce, ensuring fair exchange, allowing goods to be measured and valued consistently across different transactions and different places. The existence of standardized weights implies not just trade, but regulated trade, an authority that could establish and enforce standards, an economic system sophisticated enough that such standardization was useful. We also find evidence of craft specialization, with workshops producing pottery, beads, metalwork. We find long-distance trade connections, with materials like lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, copper from Rajasthan, marine shells from the coast. The infrastructure for a complex urban civilization was being built, though the most impressive achievements of the Indus Valley civilization, the great cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, the undeciphered Indus script, the sophisticated drainage systems, still lay in the future. As we reflect on this segment, on the birth of civilizations between 3300 and 3000 BC, we are witnessing a fundamental transformation in human organization. For the first time, societies were creating institutions that could coordinate the activities of tens of thousands of people, that could accumulate and deploy resources on scales previously unimaginable, that could record information and transmit it across time and space through writing, that could construct monuments intended to last for eternity, that could project power over vast territories. These first civilizations set patterns that would be repeated again and again in subsequent history. They established kingship as a principle of political organization, with rulers claiming divine sanction and commanding the labor and loyalty of their subjects. They created urban centers where diverse populations lived in density, where specialization allowed high levels of cultural and technological achievement, where wealth concentrated and hierarchies hardened. They developed writing, not initially for literature or history, but for administration, for tracking and controlling the complex economic relationships that sustained large societies. They engaged in long-distance trade, connecting distant regions, creating networks of exchange that spread not just goods, but ideas and technologies. But these civilizations also created new problems and tensions. The concentration of power in the hands of kings and elites created inequality and potential for exploitation. Large urban populations were vulnerable to epidemic disease and social unrest. Intensive agriculture could degrade soils and environments. Competition between states led to increasingly destructive warfare. The first civilizations were thus both achievement and tragedy, creating possibilities for human flourishing, while also creating new forms of suffering and conflict. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, Iran, and the Indus Valley, different societies were finding their own ways to organize at this new scale, creating distinctive institutions and cultural forms, while also facing similar challenges, and sometimes arriving at similar solutions. The story of these civilizations would unfold over the following millennia, with rises and falls, conquests and collapses, periods of flourishing and periods of crisis. But the foundations were laid here, between 3300 and 3000 BC, in these first states, these first cities, these first attempts to create enduring human institutions that could transcend the limits of kinship and personal relationships. As we conclude this segment, we have traced the birth of the world's first civilizations, watching as Uruk expanded its influence, as Sumer organized into competing city-states, as Egypt unified under a single king, as Proto-Elam developed on the Iranian plateau, and as the Indus Valley began its urban transformation. We have stood at a threshold, witnessing the emergence of a new type of human society, one that would dominate the next 5,000 years of history, one whose achievements and problems remain with us today. In our next segment, we will continue examining this crucial period, looking at developments in other regions, at innovations in technology and culture, at the continued expansion and elaboration of these first civilizations. But for now, rest in contemplation of this moment of beginning, of kings ascending thrones, of scribes pressing their styli into clay tablets, of cities rising on the plains, of networks stretching across continents, of humanity organizing itself at a scale and complexity never before achieved, for better and for worse, creating the world of history from the world of prehistory. Chapter 7: Global Developments and Monumental Building. We continue our exploration of the period from 3300 to 3000 BC, but now we expand our view to encompass developments across the globe. In the previous segment, we examined the birth of civilizations in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Iran, and the Indus Valley. Now we will see how these civilizations connected with one another through trade, how they expressed their power and beliefs through monumental architecture, and how, in distant regions far from these early centers of civilization, other societies were developing their own impressive achievements and distinctive ways of life. Let us begin with the networks that connected these early civilizations. By around 3100 BC, long-distance trade routes linked Mesopotamia, the Iranian plateau, and South Asia in what scholars call the Fertile Crescent trade network, though it extended well beyond that geographical designation. Elites in these regions were importing luxury items from vast distances. Lapis lazuli, that deep blue stone prized for its color, came from Badakhshan in what is now Afghanistan, traveling through multiple intermediaries over thousands of kilometers, thousands of miles, to reach Mesopotamian cities. Carnelian beads from the Indus region found their way to Mesopotamia. Mesopotamian cylinder seals have been found in Iran and even in the Indus Valley. Metals, particularly copper and tin, moved along these routes, as did precious woods, ivory, and exotic stones. These trade networks were not simple affairs. No single merchant traveled the entire route from, say, Uruk to the Indus Valley. Rather, goods passed through multiple hands, bought and sold in markets, transported by caravans and ships, accumulating value at each exchange. Some goods were tribute, gifts between rulers meant to establish relationships and obligations. Some were diplomatic, symbols of alliance or submission. But much was straightforward commerce, the exchange of goods for profit. The existence of these networks tells us several things. It tells us that these early civilizations were not isolated, that they were aware of one another, at least indirectly, that they valued goods from distant places. It tells us that travel and communication were possible across vast distances, despite the difficulties of terrain and the dangers of travel in an age without modern transportation or security. It tells us that economic relationships were sophisticated enough to support complex, multi-stage exchanges spanning thousands of kilometers and involving numerous participants. These trade goods were not necessities but luxuries, items valued for their rarity, their beauty, their associations with distant and exotic places. Lapis lazuli did not make better tools than local stone, but its rich blue color made it precious for jewelry and inlay work. The importation of such items served multiple purposes. It demonstrated the wealth and reach of elites who could afford them. It connected rulers to the exotic and the distant, enhancing their prestige. It may have served ritual purposes, with certain materials having sacred associations. And it drove the development of trade networks and commercial institutions that would, over time, also carry more utilitarian goods. In Egypt, the newly unified kingdom was beginning to express its power and its beliefs about death and eternity through monumental architecture. Between approximately 3100 and 2700 BC, Egyptian elites were buried in large rectangular structures called mastabas, from an Arabic word meaning bench, which describes their shape. These were substantial buildings, made of mud brick and increasingly of stone, with flat roofs and sloping sides. Inside, beneath the superstructure, burial chambers were cut into the rock or built into the structure, housing the body and the grave goods meant to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. The mastabas of kings and high officials could be enormous, requiring substantial resources and labor to construct. They were not isolated structures, but often grouped in necropolises, cities of the dead adjacent to the cities of the living. The most famous of these early burial grounds is at Saqqara, near Memphis, which would become Egypt's capital. Here, mastabas of the 1st and 2nd dynasty elites crowd together, each proclaiming through its size and quality the status of its occupant. These mastabas were direct predecessors of the pyramids. The famous step pyramid of Djoser, built during the 3rd dynasty, was essentially a series of mastabas stacked on top of one another, each smaller than the one below, creating a stepped profile rising toward the sky. From there, it was a conceptual and engineering leap to the smooth-sided pyramids that would become Egypt's most iconic monuments. But the roots of pyramid building lie here, in the early dynastic mastabas, in the Egyptian conviction that proper burial and proper provision for the afterlife required monumental architecture, permanent structures that could house the body and its belongings for eternity. To the north, in northern Mesopotamia, cities were developing that showed somewhat different character from the great cities of Sumer to the south. Sites such as Tel Brak, in what is now northeastern Syria, show urban-style growth in the late 4th millennium BC. Tel Brak had dense housing, with buildings packed tightly together, sharing walls, organized along lanes and alleys. It had specialized districts, areas devoted to craft production, areas for temples, areas for administration, residential neighborhoods. At its height, Tel Brak may have housed tens of thousands of people, making it one of the largest cities of its time anywhere in the world. What's particularly interesting about Tel Brak is its location in the northern Mesopotamian plains, in the region that would later be called Assyria. This was not the Sumerian heartland, but a distinct region with its own traditions, though clearly influenced by and connected to Sumerian civilization. The development of Tel Brak and other northern cities shows that urbanization was not confined to southern Mesopotamia, but was occurring across a broader region, wherever conditions were favorable: adequate water, fertile soil, strategic location for trade. The archaeology of Tel Brak reveals a city engaged in diverse activities. There were workshops producing pottery, textiles, and other goods. There were administrative buildings with seal impressions indicating bureaucratic activity. There was a massive temple complex, the so-called Eye Temple, named for thousands of small stone figurines with prominent eyes that were found there, votive offerings left by worshippers. This was a city fully integrated into the cultural and economic world of early Mesopotamian civilization, participating in the same trade networks, using similar administrative technologies, worshipping related deities, yet maintaining its own distinct identity. Far to the west, along the Atlantic coasts of Europe, communities between approximately 4,500 and 3000 BC were constructing megalithic monuments that represent some of the most impressive architectural achievements of prehistoric Europe. These were dolmens, passage graves, and later stone circles, structures built of massive stone blocks arranged in various configurations. We mentioned these briefly in an earlier segment, but now, in this period around 3000 BC, megalithic construction was reaching a peak. These monuments required extraordinary communal effort. The stones, some weighing many tons, had to be quarried or found, moved over considerable distances in some cases, and erected. Without metal tools, without wheeled vehicles in many of these regions, without draft animals capable of pulling such loads, these stones were moved by human muscle, using log rollers, sledges, and ramps, employing techniques that required both ingenuity and the coordination of many workers. Why did these communities invest such enormous labor in these monuments? The most common answer is that they were primarily funerary monuments, tombs for the dead. Many contain burial chambers where bodies or cremated remains were placed, sometimes over many generations, creating communal tombs for families or clans. But they likely served other purposes as well. They were territorial markers, visible symbols claiming land for the community that built them. They were ritual centers, places for ceremonies connecting the living with the dead and with the spiritual forces these communities recognized. They were demonstrations of collective power and identity, proof that the community could undertake and complete such ambitious projects. The Atlantic megalithic tradition shows that monumental architecture was not confined to literate, state-level societies. These were still Neolithic farming communities, without cities, without writing, without metals, yet they were building structures that have endured for 5,000 years, that still dominate the landscapes where they were erected. This reminds us that monumentality, the desire to create lasting structures that transcend individual lifetimes, is a widespread human impulse, not limited to civilizations in the traditional sense. Let us travel now to Japan, to the Jomon culture, which inhabited the Japanese archipelago for thousands of years. Between approximately 5,000 and 2,500 BC, the Jomon people were developing a sophisticated maritime culture. Excavations at Sanaimurayama, a large Jomon settlement in northern Japan, have uncovered dugout canoes, fishing hooks, spears, and net sinkers for marine hunting. These artifacts tell us that the Jomon were skilled fishermen and sea hunters, venturing onto coastal waters and perhaps into the open ocean in their dugout canoes. The Jomon are famous for their pottery, some of the earliest in the world, with elaborate decorations and unusual forms. But they were also skilled woodworkers, capable of hollowing out large logs to create canoes. Their fishing technology was sophisticated, including hooks designed for different species, nets weighted with stone sinkers, spears for larger prey. The sea provided abundant resources: fish, shellfish, seals, whales, combined with the terrestrial resources of Japan's forests: nuts, game, edible plants. These marine resources supported substantial Jomon settlements, some occupied year-round, some seasonally. Sanaimurayama was one of the largest Jomon sites, occupied for about 1,500 years. It contained pit houses, raised floor buildings, and large post structures whose purpose remains uncertain, but which may have served ritual or communal functions. The site shows evidence of trade networks extending across Japan and even to the mainland, with obsidian and jade coming from distant sources. The Jomon culture would not develop agriculture, cities, or writing, remaining a hunting, gathering, and fishing society throughout its long history. Yet it achieved a level of cultural sophistication and material comfort that challenges our assumptions about the superiority of agricultural societies. Finally, we must travel to the Americas, to the western coast of South America, where in Peru's Norte Chico region, between approximately 3,500 and 2,500 BC, something remarkable was occurring. Sites like Caral were building monumental architecture. Sunken circular plazas, large platform mounds rising up to 20 meters high, approximately 65 feet. Without ceramics and without metals. This absence of technologies we usually associate with complex societies makes the Norte Chico achievements all the more striking. How did these societies support the labor needed for such monumental construction? The answer lies in the unique economy they developed, based on cotton and fishing. The coastal region of Peru is one of the richest marine environments in the world, where cold ocean currents bring nutrients that support vast populations of fish and other sea life. The Norte Chico people exploited these resources, using nets made from cotton grown in the river valleys that cut through the coastal desert. Cotton does not provide food, but it provides fiber for textiles, including the nets that were essential for large-scale fishing. This created a complementary economy. Coastal settlements specialized in fishing, using cotton nets. Inland settlements in the river valleys grew cotton and other crops, including squash and beans. The two zones traded, exchanging fish for cotton and agricultural products, creating an integrated economic system. The fish provided abundant protein, the cotton and crops provided carbohydrates and fiber, and the surplus from both allowed the mobilization of labor for monumental construction and supported elites who coordinated these projects. Caral itself covered about 150 acres, approximately 60 hectares, and contained multiple large platform mounds, sunken plazas, and residential complexes. The mounds were built of stones set in mesh bags made from reeds, creating stable structures that have endured for millennia. These monuments required planning, coordination, and sustained effort over years or decades. They represent power and organization, the ability of some individuals or groups to command the labor of others, to direct it toward projects that served communal or elite interests. What purpose did these monuments serve? As with megaliths in Atlantic Europe, they likely combined functions: ritual centers, elite residences, symbols of power and identity, perhaps astronomical observatories. The sunken circular plazas, in particular, seem designed for communal gatherings, perhaps for ceremonies, markets, or public rituals. The Norte Chico was not a unified state, but a collection of related settlements sharing cultural traditions, participating in the same economic system, building similar types of monuments. The Espero site on Peru's coast, dating from approximately 3,700 to 2,500 BC, provides another example of this pattern. Espero built large platform mounds directly linked to the fish surpluses generated by cotton net fishing. The mounds overlooked the ocean, dominating the landscape, visible from sea and land. Espero and other coastal sites were critical nodes in the cotton fishing economy, the places where marine resources were harvested and processed, where they entered the trade networks that connected coast and interior. The Norte Chico represents the earliest complex society in the Americas, predating the better-known civilizations of Mesoamerica and the Andes by centuries or millennia. It shows that the path to social complexity did not require all the elements we often associate with civilization. Norte Chico had no writing that we know of, no ceramics, no metals, no apparent warfare. Yet it built monuments rivaling those of contemporary Old World societies. It organized economic systems, spanning diverse ecological zones. It supported what must have been a hierarchical social structure, with elites who commanded labor and resources. It lasted for 1,000 years or more, a sustained florescence of human creativity and organization. As we reflect on this segment, spanning the globe from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from northern Mesopotamia to Atlantic Europe, from Japan to Peru, we see the extraordinary diversity of human societies around 3000 BC. Some, like Sumer and Egypt, were developing all the characteristics we associate with civilization: cities, states, writing, monumental architecture, complex hierarchies. Others, like the Jomon and the Atlantic megalith builders, remained outside the civilizational trajectory, but nevertheless achieved impressive cultural and technological sophistication. Still others, like Norte Chico, developed some aspects of civilization, while lacking others we might consider essential. We see too certain common themes. The construction of monumental architecture appears across multiple societies, from Egyptian mastabas to Mesopotamian temples, to Atlantic megaliths to Norte Chico platform mounds. This suggests a widespread human impulse to create permanent structures, to mark the landscape, to express through building the power, beliefs, and identity of communities. We see the importance of trade networks connecting distant regions, whether the luxury goods moving across the Fertile Crescent or the cotton and fish exchanged in Norte Chico. We see the emergence of hierarchies and elites, people with the power to command labor and resources, to be buried in special tombs, to wear exotic jewelry, to live in larger houses. Yet we also see that there is no single path, no inevitable sequence of developments. The Jomon achieved complexity without agriculture. Norte Chico built monuments without metals or writing. The megalith builders created enduring structures without cities or states. Each society found its own way, shaped by its environment, its history, its particular constellation of resources and challenges, its cultural traditions and values. As we conclude this segment, and with it our examination of Part 3, we have witnessed the birth and early florescence of the world's first civilizations, watching as states consolidated in Mesopotamia and Egypt, as trade networks spanned continents, as monumental architecture rose in diverse societies around the globe. We have stood at the culmination of thousands of years of gradual development, the moment when human societies achieved levels of organization and capability that would define the next 5,000 years of history. The world of 3000 BC was vastly more complex than the world of 5500 BC, where we began our journey. Villages had become cities. Chiefdoms had become kingdoms. Simple record-keeping had become writing systems capable of recording laws, literature, and history. Local exchange had become long-distance trade networks. And everywhere, humans were reshaping their environments, building monuments, creating institutions, expressing through their works their power, their beliefs, their hopes for enduring significance. In our next and final part, we will continue forward, examining the period from 3000 to 2500 BC, watching as these early civilizations mature, as new innovations appear, as the patterns established in these earlier periods continue to unfold and elaborate. But for now, rest in contemplation of this world of 3000 BC, of the fishermen of Peru hauling in their cotton nets, of the megalith builders of Europe raising their stone monuments, of the Jomon crafters hollowing their canoes, of the Egyptian elites entombed in their mastabas, of the Mesopotamian merchants traveling trade routes that spanned continents, and of all the countless people, known and unknown, who built this world and passed it on to those who would follow. Part 4. Regional Specialization and Late Neolithic Chalcolithic. Circa 3000 BC to 2500 BC. We arrive now at the final segment of our journey through history from 5000 BC to 2500 BC, examining the period from approximately 3000 to 2500 BC. This is an era of consolidation and elaboration, when the patterns established in previous centuries continued to develop and diversify. The great civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt were maturing, developing the institutions and cultural forms that would define them for millennia. But beyond these civilizational centers, across the vast expanses of Eurasia, Africa, and the Americas, other societies were finding their own paths, developing distinctive adaptations to their environments, creating their own impressive achievements. This is a period of regional specialization, when different parts of the world were diverging in their trajectories, creating the cultural diversity that would characterize the ancient world. Let us begin on the Eurasian steppes, those vast grasslands stretching from Ukraine to Mongolia, where during the 5th and 4th millennia BC, distinctive burial traditions were emerging that would come to characterize steppe societies for centuries to come. These are the Kurgan burials, named from a Turkic word for the earthen mounds raised over graves. The Kurgans vary in size from small mounds a few meters across to massive structures tens of meters in diameter and several meters high, visible from great distances across the flat steppe landscape. Beneath these mounds, in chambers dug into the earth or constructed of wood and stone, the dead were laid to rest, often in distinctive positions, on their backs or sides, sometimes in a flexed position with knees drawn up. Around them were placed grave goods, pottery vessels containing food and drink for the journey to the afterlife, weapons such as stone maces or copper daggers, ornaments of bone and shell, and sometimes sacrificed animals, particularly horses. The richest kurgans, presumably belonging to chiefs or other elites, contained particularly elaborate grave goods, including items imported from distant regions, demonstrating the deceased's connections and wealth. These Kurgan burials reflect the emergence of warrior elites and mobile herding societies on the steppes. The presence of weapons in graves, the emphasis on horses, the investments in individual burials rather than communal tombs, all suggest societies organized around warfare and pastoralism, where successful warriors could accumulate prestige and power. The steppe environment favored mobile pastoralism, herding sheep, cattle, and increasingly horses across seasonal pastures. This mobility, combined with the domestication of horses, would eventually make steppe peoples formidable in warfare, able to move quickly, to strike and retreat, to coordinate attacks across wide fronts. But in this early period, these societies were still developing the technologies and tactics that would later make them so significant in Eurasian history. To the west, in Central and Northern Europe during the 5th and 4th millennia BC, Neolithic farmers were building large timber longhouses. These were substantial structures, sometimes exceeding 50 meters, 164 feet, in length, built of massive wooden posts supporting walls of wattle and daub, with thatched roofs. A single longhouse could contain multiple families, their living spaces partitioned by interior walls, with common areas for storage and work. At one end, there might be space for animals, bringing livestock under the same roof as humans during winter months, their body heat helping to warm the structure. These longhouses were both domestic and economic centers. They were where families lived, cooked, ate, and slept. But they were also where much productive work occurred: spinning and weaving, tool making, food processing, and storage. Around the longhouses were fields where wheat and barley grew, gardens with peas and lentils, pastures for cattle and pigs. The longhouses themselves, requiring substantial timber and labor to construct, represented significant communal investments. Their size and permanence speak to stable, settled communities with the organizational capacity to undertake major construction projects. The distribution of longhouses across Central and Northern Europe marks the spread of the Neolithic way of life. as farming communities pushed into regions previously inhabited by hunter-gatherers. These longhouse builders were clearing forests, establishing fields, creating a cultural landscape shaped by agriculture. The longhouse tradition would persist for centuries, and indeed, echoes of it remain in the traditional farmhouses of Northern Europe. Long structures housing both human and animal inhabitants under one roof. Between approximately 4,800 and 3000 BC, in what is now Ukraine and Moldova, the Cucuteni Tripilia culture created some of the most remarkable settlements of the Neolithic world. These were mega-settlements, villages and towns of extraordinary size for their time, some exceeding 10,000 inhabitants. The houses were laid out in concentric rings, multiple circles of dwellings surrounding a central open space, creating a distinctive bullseye pattern visible in archaeological surveys. Some of these settlements covered hundreds of hectares, rivaling or exceeding the size of contemporary Mesopotamian cities. What makes these mega-settlements even more remarkable is that they were built by societies without apparent state structures, without monumental public architecture, without writing or metals. They were egalitarian, or at least not strongly hierarchical farming communities that somehow organized themselves to create these vast settlements. The houses were similar in size and construction, suggesting relative social equality. The economy was based on agriculture, growing wheat and barley, herding cattle, sheep, and pigs, and supplemented by hunting and gathering. Why did the Cucuteni Tripilia people create such large settlements? This remains debated. Perhaps it was for defense, concentrating populations to protect against raiders. Perhaps it was a response to favorable environmental conditions that allowed intensive agriculture in concentrated areas. Perhaps it was driven by social or ritual factors, a desire to live in large communities for reasons we can no longer fully understand. Whatever the cause, these mega-settlements represent a unique experiment in Neolithic social organization, one that would not be repeated at this scale until much later. Interestingly, many of these mega-settlements seem to have been deliberately burned and abandoned after a generation or two of occupation. Whether this was due to environmental degradation, social tensions, ritual practices, or other factors remains uncertain. The Cucuteni Tripilia culture would eventually decline, and the mega-settlements disappeared, but they stand as testimony to the organizational capabilities of Neolithic societies, even without the hierarchies and institutions we associate with civilizations. In Japan, the Jomon culture continued its distinctive trajectory. We mentioned earlier the site of Sanaimurayama, and now, in the period from approximately 3900 to 2200 BC, this site was at its peak as a major Jomon center. Sanaimurayama featured large pit dwellings, semi-subterranean houses with wooden frames supporting thatched roofs. The pits provided insulation, keeping houses cooler in summer and warmer in winter. Some of these dwellings were quite large, capable of housing extended families. The site also contained burial jars for infants, ceramic vessels in which the bodies of deceased infants were placed before burial. This practice suggests special care for the very young, distinctive funerary rituals for those who died before reaching maturity. The pottery at Sanaimurayama, like Jomon pottery generally, was decorated with cord-marked patterns, created by pressing twisted cords into the soft clay before firing. Some vessels had elaborate sculptural elements, with fantasy forms and exuberant decorations that go far beyond functional requirements. Sanaimurayama was occupied for over a millennium and a half, an extraordinary span of time suggesting successful adaptation to the local environment. The inhabitants relied on fishing, hunting, gathering nuts and plants, and possibly some cultivation of hardy plants like gourds and beans, though they never adopted intensive agriculture. The site shows evidence of extensive trade networks, with obsidian from distant sources, jade, and other materials not locally available. Large post structures at the site may have served ceremonial or astronomical functions, though their exact purpose remains uncertain. The Jomon culture would endure for several more millennia, eventually being displaced or absorbed by incoming agricultural peoples from the mainland. But during its long fluorescence, Jomon society demonstrated that hunter-gatherer-fisher communities could achieve stability, cultural sophistication, and material comfort without adopting agriculture, without creating states, without writing. It represents an alternative pathway, a road not taken by most human societies, but viable and successful in the right circumstances. In the high Andes of South America, after approximately 4000 BC, another important domestication was occurring: the taming of camelids, particularly llamas and alpacas. These animals, relatives of camels adapted to high-altitude environments, were initially hunted, but gradually brought under human management. Llamas, the larger of the two, could serve as pack animals, carrying loads across mountain trails where wheeled vehicles could not go. Alpacas, smaller and with finer wool, were primarily raised for their fleece, which could be spun and woven into textiles. The domestication of camelids complemented the cultivation of potatoes and quinoa in the high-altitude Puna grasslands. These crops, adapted to cold, thin air, and poor soils, provided carbohydrates and protein. The camelids provided wool for clothing essential in the cold mountain climate, meat, and transport. Together, these resources allowed human communities to thrive at altitudes above 3,000 meters, 9,842 feet, in environments that would otherwise be marginal for human habitation. The integration of camelid herding with high-altitude agriculture would become characteristic of Andean societies, supporting eventually the Inca Empire and other complex societies of the region. In Mesoamerica, around 2500 BC, we find the emergence of La Blanca in what is now Guatemala. This site featured earthen mounds and early maize agriculture in what archaeologists call the Moquaya tradition. Maize, or corn, was originally domesticated in Mexico from a wild grass called teosinte, a plant with tiny seed heads bearing little resemblance to modern corn. Through patient selection over thousands of years, Mesoamerican farmers transformed teosinte into maize, a plant that could feed large populations, but also required considerable labor to grow and process. La Blanca marks an early stage in the development of Mesoamerican complexity, the formative roots of the civilizations that would later flourish in the region: the Olmec, Maya, Zapotec, and others. The earthen mounds at La Blanca were modest compared to later pyramids, but represent the beginning of monumental architecture in Mesoamerica. The adoption and intensification of maize agriculture would drive population growth and social complexity, as the reliable surpluses it provided allowed larger, more sedentary populations. Far to the north, around 2500 BC, the Aleutian tradition was emerging in Alaska's Aleutian Islands, that chain of volcanic islands stretching westward from the Alaska Peninsula toward Asia. These islands are harsh environments, windswept, treeless, often foggy, with limited terrestrial resources. But the surrounding ocean is rich with life: fish, seals, sea otters, whales, seabirds. The people who settled these islands developed maritime adaptations, using boats for island hopping and sea mammal hunting. These boats were likely predecessors of the kayaks and umiaks that would later characterize Arctic maritime cultures. Light, skin-covered watercraft capable of handling rough seas, maneuverable enough for hunting marine mammals. The Aleutian tradition people hunted seals and sea otters with harpoons, fished with hooks and nets, gathered shellfish and seabird eggs, collected driftwood and other materials washed ashore. They lived in semi-subterranean houses, partially dug into the earth for insulation against the constant wind. They created sophisticated technologies for surviving in an environment that would seem impossible to those unfamiliar with its resources. The settlement of the Aleutian Islands represents human expansion into one of the Earth's most challenging environments, demonstrating the adaptability and ingenuity that allowed our species to inhabit virtually every corner of the globe. The Aleutian tradition would persist for millennia, maintaining its distinctive maritime culture, even as other societies around the world were developing agriculture and cities. Even farther north, around the same time, 2500 BC, independents, one people were entering Greenland from North America. These were among the first humans to inhabit the far north of Greenland, the lands closest to the North Pole. They brought with them tools suited for Arctic caribou hunting, bows and arrows, specialized stone points, skin-working tools for processing hides into clothing and shelters. They hunted musk oxen and caribou, fished Arctic char, survived in a landscape of ice and tundra where winter darkness lasts for months. The independence one culture did not endure. Greenland would be abandoned and recolonized several times over the following millennia. But their presence shows that by 2500 BC, humans had reached even the most extreme environments, the farthest margins of habitability. These Arctic hunters were living as far from the cities of Egypt and Mesopotamia, culturally and environmentally, as it is possible to be while remaining on Earth. Yet they too were part of the human story, finding their own ways to survive and thrive, creating their own tools and traditions, their own knowledge systems adapted to their unique environment. Returning to Egypt, around 2670 BC, a revolution in architecture was occurring. The step pyramid of Djoser, begun in this year, represents the roots of true pyramid construction. We mentioned earlier the mastabas, rectangular tombs of the early dynastic period. The step pyramid took the mastaba concept and expanded it vertically, stacking 6 mastaba-like layers of decreasing size on top of one another to create a stepped profile, rising about 62 meters, 203 feet, into the sky. This was built for Djoser, a pharaoh of the 3rd dynasty, and was designed by Imhotep, an official whose name has come down to us as one of history's first named architects. The step pyramid was not just a larger tomb, but a conceptual breakthrough. It demonstrated that stone could be used for massive construction, that structures could rise to heights previously unimaginable, that royal power could be expressed through monumentality on a scale that dwarfed everything that had come before. The pyramid complex at Saqqara, with its courtyards, chapels, and boundary walls, covered 15 hectares, 37 acres. It required organization of labor on an unprecedented scale, quarrying and moving millions of blocks of limestone, coordinating thousands of workers over years or decades. From the step pyramid, it was a short conceptual leap to the smooth-sided true pyramids that would be built by Djoser's successors. Within a few decades, pharaohs would be constructing the Great Pyramids of Giza, monuments that would remain among the world's tallest structures for over 3,000 years. But it all begins here, with Djoser's step pyramid, with the vision of rising toward the heavens in imperishable stone, with the organizational capacity to transform that vision into reality. In West Africa, around 2500 BC, in Mauritania's Tikrit region, approximately 500 stone-walled villages were established. This was an area that had once been wetter, part of the Saharan savanna that was now drying as the Sahara's aridification continued. The villages featured stone walls, defensive structures, or perhaps just windbreaks, and their inhabitants practiced millet farming and herded cattle, sheep, and goats. As the region continued to dry over the following centuries, many of these villages would be abandoned, their inhabitants moving south toward more reliable water sources. But for a time, this region supported substantial populations, creating a distinctive African variant of Neolithic culture, adapted to the savanna environment with its seasonal rains and grass-covered plains. Finally, along the Nile in Sudan, between approximately 3000 and 2500 BC, the Kidero site featured communal huts, wavy-line pottery, and cattle remains indicating settled herding communities. This was part of a broader Neolithic tradition in the Nile Valley south of Egypt, where communities were developing their own pathways toward complexity. These were cattle herders, but they also practiced some agriculture, fished the Nile, hunted game. Their pottery, decorated with wavy lines impressed into the clay, is distinctive and beautiful, showing accomplished craftsmanship. The Kidero site, and others like it in Nubia, the region of the Nile Valley between Egypt and sub-Saharan Africa, represent societies that were influenced by, but not subordinate to Egypt in this early period. They would eventually come into Egypt's orbit, sometimes conquered, sometimes trading partners, sometimes threats. But around 3000 to 2500 BC, they were still independent, developing their own traditions, their own ways of life adapted to the Nubian environment. As we reflect on this final segment, covering the period from 3000 to 2500 BC, and examining developments across the globe, we are struck by the extraordinary diversity of human societies. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, the first civilizations were maturing, building monuments that would endure for millennia, developing writing systems that would record their histories, creating state structures that would organize millions of people. But elsewhere, different trajectories were unfolding. The Cucutini Tripilia were building megasettlements without states. The Jomon were thriving without agriculture. The Aleutian tradition people were settling some of Earth's harshest environments. Andean societies were herding camelids in high mountains. West African communities were farming millet in the savannah. Each of these societies was solving the fundamental problems of human existence: how to obtain food, how to organize socially, how to pass knowledge to the next generation, how to make sense of the world and one's place in it. In their own ways, shaped by their environments, their histories, their resources, their values. There was no single path, no inevitable progression, no ladder of development that all societies climbed in the same sequence. Instead, there was diversity, creativity, adaptation, innovation occurring independently in different places, creating the rich tapestry of human cultures. Yet there were also common threads, themes that appear across multiple societies despite their isolation from one another. The construction of monuments, whether Egyptian pyramids or Mesoamerican mounds or European megaliths, appears everywhere humans achieve surplus production and social organization beyond the level of small bands. Social hierarchies emerge repeatedly, though they take different forms and reach different levels of intensity. The domestication of plants and animals occurs independently in multiple regions, as different peoples learn to shape the living world to their needs. Trade networks develop wherever societies are in contact, exchanging goods, ideas, and technologies. As we conclude this final segment and our entire journey from 5000 to 2500 BC, we can look back at the extraordinary transformation that occurred during these 2.5 millennia. We began in a world of villages, where farming was still relatively new, where the largest communities numbered in the hundreds, where metals were unknown, where writing did not exist. We end in a world of cities and states, where populations in the tens of thousands lived in urban centers, where bronze was being produced and traded across continents, where writing systems were recording laws and literature, where monuments of stone rose above the landscape as permanent testaments to human ambition and capability. The foundations of civilization had been laid. The institutions, technologies, and cultural forms developed during this period would continue to elaborate and spread. The city-states of Sumer would give rise to larger empires. Egypt's kingdoms would endure for 3,000 years, building monuments that still astound us. Writing would spread and diversify, eventually giving us the historical records that allow us to know these ancient peoples in their own words. Trade networks would expand, eventually connecting societies from Britain to China. Technologies would advance, from bronze to iron to steel. But all of that rested on the achievements of the people we have followed in these segments. Those patient farmers who learned to coax more from their fields. Those early metalworkers who learned to smelt and shape copper and bronze. Those scribes who invented writing to track goods and eventually to record poetry and history. Those architects who learned to build in stone. Those leaders who organized communities into cities and states. Those traders who ventured across deserts and mountains to exchange goods and ideas. These people, most of them anonymous, most of them known to us only through the artifacts they left behind, built the foundation of the world we inhabit today. And so we conclude our journey through the deep past, from 5000 BC to 2500 BC, having witnessed the transformation of human society, from Neolithic villages to Bronze Age civilizations, having traveled from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from the steppes to Japan, from Peru to Greenland, observing the infinite creativity of our species, the diverse solutions we have found to the challenge of existence, the monuments and institutions and traditions we have created that connect us across the millennia to those ancient peoples who were, in all essential ways, fully human, fully us. Rest now in the contemplation of this vast sweep of history, of the thousands of generations who lived and died, who loved and suffered, who created and destroyed, who passed on to their children the accumulated wisdom and achievements that made possible everything that would follow. Rest knowing that you have walked, in imagination, through the earliest cities, that you have stood beside the first scribes as they pressed their marks into clay, that you have watched the first pyramids rise, that you have journeyed with traders across ancient routes, that you have witnessed the birth of civilization itself. And rest knowing that all of human history, all of our achievements and failures, our glories and our tragedies, rest on the foundation these ancient people built, stone by stone, innovation by innovation, generation by generation, creating the world that would eventually become ours.